Susan's Big Day by Jeffrey Uhlmann. Susan was a sweet little girl. She always picked up her toys when finished playing with them. She was always polite, and she always looked both ways before crossing the street. But on this fateful day, her innocence would be forever cast into the oblivion of forgotten past. "Susan," her mother asked, "would you like to help me clean out the cupboard?"
"Yes,"
Susan replied with eager anticipation.
"I'd love to."
Nothing gave Susan greater satisfaction than to please her mother. This was a quite difficult task, however, because her mother had been very irritable as of late. Nevertheless, this was Susan's chance to make her mother proud.
"Susan, why don't you throw away these boxes?"
her mother suggested. Susan was most happy to oblige.
"What about that old box of birdseed?"
Susan asked.
"Polly died over a year ago." "Yes, I know," her mother said, "but I just can't bear to throw it away." "But we can't just let it clutter up the cupboard,"
Susan suggested cautiously.
"Can we?" "I guess you're right," her mother said. "Sometimes I tend to be a real pack rat. I always worry about throwing away things that might be needed someday." "But birdseed?"
Susan asked laughingly.
"Silly, isn't it?" her mother conceded as they both laughed. "I'm glad I have such a good little helper around the house."
These were words Susan had longed to hear, and she couldn't help but to let out a smile that stretched from ear to ear. She whistled happily as she disposed of the trash and proceeded to wipe out the base of the cupboard. This was the happiest day of her life. The day was made even more pleasant as Susan recalled that her mother had a date with the fire chief that evening. Susan had never known her real father, but she was sure nobody could make a better father than the fire chief. Hopefully, Susan thought, her mother would tell him what a good little helper she had been that day. When the doorbell finally rang, signaling the arrival of the fire chief, Susan was in her room, and by the time she got to the door, her mother had already answered it. "Susan," her mother said, "I'd like you to meet the fire chief."
"Hello,"
said Susan.
"I'm very glad to meet you."
"Hello," said the fire chief.
"What are you all going to be doing tonight?"
Susan asked.
"Watch television,"
her mother replied.
"Can I get either of you any snacks?"
Susan asked eagerly.
"That would be very nice of you. Would you like anything, fire chief?"
"Oh, why, yes,"
said the fire chief.
"By chance, do you have any bird seed?"
"Damn,"
said Susan.